Welcome back to Askewed Reviews. And at the end of this week, it's St. Patrick's Day, so we're doing the entire Leprechaun series. And today's movie is the 1995 film Leprechaun 3. Here is your trivia question for today. Who is the only character the leprechaun meets in Vegas and seems to get along with? The answer will be at the end of this episode. So, this film starts off in Las Vegas, and as we find out, it has absolutely no connection to the first two films. We meet one of our main characters, Scott, who is heading through Vegas on his way to California to start college. Scott then almost literally runs into our other main character, Tammy, whose car has broken down and needs a ride to her work. Scott, who is almost immediately smitten with Tammy, agrees to take her to her job, and that job just so happens to be as an assistant to a magician at a casino. At this casino, we meet all sorts of interesting but terrible people, including Mitch, who owns the casino, Fazio the Great, and Loretta, who always seem to be scheming, and Art and Tony, who are trying to get some sort of money out of Mitch. It really seems like the only good person working at this casino is Tammy. Now, while we're getting to know all of these individuals, Scott unfortunately is losing all of his money at the casino. After losing all of his money, Scott realizes that maybe he has to go to a pawn shop to get more money to get his money back. While at this pawn shop, he finds a gold coin that actually whisks him away back to the casino as he wishes to not only be back there, but now on a winning streak. Now, earlier in the day at that same pawn shop, a strange man sold a statue of a leprechaun to the owner of the shop. The owner, of course, did not listen to the warning of the strange man and ended up taking the necklace off of the statue. Doing so allowed the leprechaun to come back to life, and now he is on a murderous rampage until he gets all of his gold back. The leprechaun eventually figures out what casino his coin is at, but by this point, the coin has now traveled from hand to hand to other people who have been granted their wishes. The leprechaun at one point does run into Scott and ends up biting him. Now, Scott does manage to get free of this, but unfortunately, a change begins to start happening. So, will the leprechaun ever find his missing gold coin? And will Scott ever revert back to normal? This movie was directed by Brian Trenchard Smith. Here's something interesting you may not have noticed, but it's actually the director's signature that appears on Scott's check from his parents. Leprechaun 3 was actually the first in the series to not get a theatrical release, but it was actually the highest grossing direct to video film at the time. The third film was actually intended to be the final film, but since it did so well as a direct to video, they actually continued the franchise. There was originally talks of making this film 3D, but that idea ended up being dropped. Warwick Davis has actually stated that this was his favorite film to make in the series. And hopefully you're aware that he is the actor who played the Leprechaun. Also, Warwick does make a brief cameo out of costume as one of the patrons in the casino. You can see him right as Scott first comes in. John Gatton's final stage of Leprechaun makeup actually took about an hour and a half to 2 hours to apply. So whether or not it was because of this film or if she just felt it was the right time, Lee Armstrong actually quit acting after this movie. Brian Trenchard Smith directed Night of the Demons 2 before this film, but what's interesting is some of the stars from that movie can actually be seen throughout the casino in this movie. So the film takes place in Las Vegas, Nevada, and quite a bit of the movie was actually filmed there, but some of it was also filmed in California. All of the morgue scenes were actually filmed in the kitchen of the Ambassador Hotel, which is actually the very same kitchen that Robert F. Kennedy was assassinated in. Mark Jones, who is actually the creator of the Leprechaun franchise, once came up with an interesting spin off called Vamprechaun. It was apparently about a half vampire, half leprechaun hybrid that would bite people at their ankles to feed. Jones was even hoping at some point to actually get Warwick to play this character as well, and then eventually connect the two universes. The body count for this film is 7. You have Gupta, who was strangled with a phone cord, Mitch, who was electrocuted by a sex bot, Art, who is beaten with a shillelagh, Tony, whose eye was gouged out and then beaten with the shillelagh, Loretta, who has my favorite fatality of the film, as her breasts, lips, and butt inflated until they exploded. A morgue attendant, who was stabbed with multiple medical tools. And Fazio, who was cut in half. So when it comes to the film Leprechaun 3, this also wasn't all that great, but it still was slightly entertaining. So I think I'm going to give this one a 2 out of 5. Now, as for the trivia question from the beginning of this episode, who is the only character the leprechaun meets in Vegas and seems to get along with? So, at one point in the film, the leprechaun actually runs into Elvis, or at least an Elvis impersonator. Now, the two of them not only seem to have a good conversation, but they also compliment each other's outfits and even stand together for what seems to be a photo opportunity. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Askewed Reviews. And if there's a movie you'd like to see get a review, just mention it in the comments.